The morning I discovered
It doesn't
strangers
make
living on my
sense.
land, I
The
thought it was a
route
mistake.
vanished right
A
here.
terrible paperwork
I
mix-up
can't
kind of
find the
mistake.
exit.
The kind you fix with a phone call, maybe a lawyer, and a week of waiting. I had no idea it would turn into a war over property rights, access roads, and a homeowners association that believed they could simply build over me and hope I wouldn't notice. It started with a drive. My property sits just outside town, far enough to feel peaceful, but close enough to stay connected. It's land I inherited from my father, the kind of place filled with memories, long summers, dusty boots, and promises that this land would stay in the family forever. For years, nothing changed. The same open fields, the same quiet road leading in and out. That road mattered. It wasn't just a driveway. It was the only legal access point to several surrounding acres, including mine. One morning, I noticed heavy equipment in the distance. Bulldozers, trucks, workers in bright vests moving like ants across land that had always been empty. At first, I assumed a neighboring plot had finally sold. Development happens everywhere eventually. But the closer I drove, the more my stomach tightened. Because the construction wasn't next door. It was inside my property line. Fresh wooden frames stood where wild grass used to grow. Concrete foundations cut straight through land I knew better than the back of my hand. Stakes and tape marked boundaries that didn't match any map I'd ever seen. And parked along the side of the dirt road was a sign with 4 letters that would change everything. HOA. I remember stepping out of the truck and just staring. The sound of hammers echoed across land that didn't belong to them. A worker waved politely like nothing was wrong. Like building houses on someone else's property was just another Tuesday. When I confronted the site manager, he smiled and said the words that still replay in my head. "Sir, this development has full approval. The Homeowners Association owns this section." Owns this section. My section. I went home and pulled out every document I had. Surveys, deeds, tax records. And there was in black and white my name, my land, my boundaries. No easements. No sales. No permissions. Nothing that gave anyone the right to build a single nail into the soil. That's when the real shock hit me. The new neighborhood wasn't just being built on my property, they had already sold the houses. Families were moving in. Kids were playing in yards that legally didn't exist. And every single one of those homes relied on one thing to get in or out the access road that ran straight through my land. I stood at the edge of that road that evening, watching cars drive past like they owned the place, and realized something chilling. They hadn't just built houses on my property. They had trapped themselves behind my gate. And in that moment, I made a decision that would turn the entire neighborhood against me. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the same question over and over. How does an entire neighborhood get built on land that isn't theirs? Not a fence, not a shed, not a misunderstanding between neighbors. Full houses, foundations, families unpacking boxes, mailboxes already installed like this place had existed for years. By sunrise, my dining table was buried in paperwork. Old surveys rolled open. Property tax receipts stacked in neat piles. Handwritten notes from my father tucked into a folder labeled land. Do not lose. He'd always been protective of this place. Almost obsessive. As a kid, I never understood why. Now I did. My father bought the property decades ago when the area was nothing but dirt roads and scattered farms. Developers had tried to buy him out more than once. He always refused. Said land wasn't just dirt, it was control, security, freedom. He used to joke, "The day someone builds here without asking me is the day the world's gone crazy." I wish he'd been wrong. The first call I made was to the county office. I expected confusion, maybe an apology. Instead, I got polite silence followed by a sentence that made my stomach drop. According to our records, a development plan was approved for that area last year. Approved. I remember gripping the phone, so hard my hand hurt. I asked for the documents, the permits, the zoning approvals. Hours later, a thick email landed in my inbox. Dozens of pages of plans, maps, and signatures. The neighborhood even had a name. Streets named. Lot numbers assigned. Marketing brochures showing smiling families walking dogs along sidewalks that cut right across my property lines. It all looked official. Except one thing. The landowner's signature wasn't mine. It wasn't my father's either. Someone had signed off on the development as if they owned the land. And, somehow, the system never questioned it. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. The homeowners association wasn't just building homes. They had already sold most of them. Real estate listings were online. Open house photos showed staged living rooms and freshly planted trees. Reviews from buyers thanked the HOA for creating a peaceful private community with limited access traffic. Limited access. That phrase kept popping up. In brochures, on their website, in planning documents. Because the neighborhood had only one entrance. My road. The dirt road my father built himself decades ago. The road that connected the property to the main highway. The road that sat completely, undeniably, legally inside my boundary lines. Without it, the neighborhood had no legal way in or out. I drove back the next afternoon and parked near the construction site. This time I stayed longer. Watched people move furniture into homes that technically didn't belong where they stood. A woman waved while carrying a box labeled kitchen. A man struggled to assemble a basketball hoop in a driveway that cut into land I paid taxes on every year. They didn't look like villains. They looked excited, hopeful, like people starting a new chapter of their lives. And that's what made everything hurt more. Because the real fight wasn't going to be with the families. It was going to be with the homeowners association that put them here. The HOA office sat in a temporary trailer near the entrance of the road. Clean logo on the door. Fresh gravel path leading up to it. I stood outside for a long moment, staring at the sign, trying to slow my breathing. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was a system. Paperwork. Lawyers. Investors. People who had convinced themselves they owned something that wasn't theirs. When I finally walked inside, the woman at the desk greeted me with a bright, practiced smile. Welcome to the community. Are you here about purchasing a lot? I remember the silence that followed when I answered. No, I said. I'm here because you built your community on my property. Her smile didn't disappear right away. It just froze, like her brain needed a second to catch up. Then she said the sentence that made the entire situation feel even bigger than I'd feared. You'll need to speak with our legal department. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be solved with a simple phone call. The HOA's legal department didn't call me back that day, or the next. 3 days passed before I finally got an email requesting a formal meeting to discuss concerns. Concerns. Like this was a scheduling conflict or a misplaced package instead of an entire neighborhood sitting on land I legally owned. The meeting was set for the following week. In the meantime, life on my property kept moving forward like nothing was wrong. More families arrived. More moving trucks rolled down my road. And every time I heard tires crunch against the gravel my father had poured with his own hands, something twisted tighter in my chest. I started noticing the little things. Trash bins lined up neatly near the curb. A delivery van stopping to drop off furniture. Kids riding bikes in slow circles at the entrance, their laughter echoing across the open land. The neighborhood was coming to life faster than I could process what was happening. One afternoon, a little boy knocked on my truck window while I was parked near the gate. "Do you live here?" he asked, holding a basketball under his arm. I hesitated before answering. "Yeah, I do." He smiled like that was the best news he'd heard all day. "Cool. My dad says this road is private, so it'll be safe to play here." Private. Safe. I forced a smile and nodded, but inside, the words hit like a warning bell. Because the truth was the exact opposite. This road wasn't private to them. It was private to me, and they had no idea. That moment stuck with me long after he ran back to his house. For the first time, the situation felt heavier than paperwork and legal battles. These families had invested their savings, their plans, their futures into homes that might not legally belong where they stood. I kept asking myself the same uncomfortable question. If I fought back, who would actually suffer? The HOA executives, or the families who trusted them? The answer made everything harder. When a meeting day finally arrived, the HOA didn't hold it in the temporary trailer. They booked a conference room in a polished office building downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows, glass tables, coffee served in neat white cups. Everything designed to feel professional, calm, and controlled. There were 3 people waiting when I walked in: a lawyer, a development manager, and a woman introduced as the HOA president. They didn't look nervous. They looked prepared. That's what scared me. The lawyer spoke first, voice calm and practiced. He explained that their development company had purchased what they believed was the correct parcel through a third-party land acquisition firm. According to their documents, the land transfer had been legal, verified, and approved through multiple channels. I slid my survey across the table. My deed, tax statements going back years. Silence filled the room as they studied the papers. For the first time, the confidence in their faces cracked. The development manager leaned back in his chair and muttered, almost to himself, "That's not the parcel we bought." The room shifted after that. The tone changed from polite to cautious. Questions turned into quiet side conversations. Papers shuffled. Someone stepped out to make a phone call that lasted far longer than the others. And then the lawyer returned with a new sentence. "We may be dealing with a title error." A title error. 2 words that sounded small, but carried enormous consequences. Because a title error meant someone had sold land they didn't own, which meant the HOA might have spent millions building homes in the wrong place, which meant lawsuits, insurance claims, developers pointing fingers at acquisition firms pointing fingers at surveyors pointing fingers at county records. And somewhere in the middle of that storm sat me, in a road that every homeowner depended on. The HOA president tried to shift the conversation toward temporary solutions. She spoke about cooperation, patience, and community spirit, about how everyone wanted the same thing, a peaceful resolution. Then she asked the question that revealed their real fear. Would you consider granting permanent access to the road while this gets sorted out? Granting access, like it was a favor, like it was inevitable. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked how long temporary would last. The lawyer avoided eye contact. These matters can take time. How much time? He hesitated. Possibly years. Years. Years of strangers using my land as their private entrance. Years of legal battles while property lines blurred and expectations hardened. Years of slowly losing control of the very thing my father fought to protect. For the first time, doubt crept into my thoughts. Not about my rights, those were clear, but about what kind of person I was willing to become to defend them. Because standing my ground meant disrupting hundreds of lives. But stepping aside meant surrendering the land piece by piece until it wasn't really mine anymore. As the meeting ended, the HOA president walked me to the elevator. Her voice softened, almost pleading. "There are families here now. We have to think about the community." I nodded slowly. So do I. The elevator doors closed between us, and in the reflection of the metal walls, I saw someone I barely recognized. Someone angrier, more stubborn, more protective than I'd ever been before. Outside, I sat in my truck for a long time without starting the engine, because deep down, I knew something had changed in that room. They weren't asking for permission anymore. They were counting on hesitation. And for the first time, the idea of shutting that road off didn't feel extreme. It felt inevitable. After that meeting, the tone changed. The emails started arriving the very next morning. Polite at first, carefully worded, full of phrases like temporary cooperation, shared interests, and community benefit. Every message ended with the same request wrapped in softer language: grant access to the road. I stopped replying after the 5th email. Instead, I called a property attorney. The first thing he asked for was my documentation. The second thing he asked was a question that made the situation feel even heavier. Has anyone from the HOA asked for a written easement yet? I told him no. There was a long pause on the phone before he said quietly, "They will." An easement would change everything. It would turn their temporary problem into my permanent reality. Once access rights were written and recorded, that road wouldn't truly be mine anymore. It would belong to the neighborhood just as much as it belonged to me. Maybe more. That realization lit a fire under me. I ordered a new professional survey. Not the old faded one from my father's files. A fresh, modern survey with GPS measurements, boundary markers, and legal certification. If this fight was coming, I wanted zero doubt about where my land began and ended. When the survey crew arrived, the neighborhood noticed immediately. Bright flags appeared across the edges of lawns. Orange paint marks cut through patches of grass that had been planted only weeks earlier. Metal stakes appeared along the road like silent warning signs. People started asking questions. The first confrontation happened 2 days later. A man approached me while I was standing near one of the new boundary stakes. He looked exhausted, like someone who'd spent weeks unpacking boxes and assembling furniture. "Hey," he said cautiously, "do you know why they're putting flags in our yards?" "Our yards." The words lingered in the air. I explained as gently as I could that the survey was routine, that property lines were being verified, that paperwork was being sorted out. He nodded slowly, but the worry in his eyes didn't fade. "My wife picked this house because it felt safe," he said quietly. "We used everything we had to buy it. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't." That night, neighborhood chatter exploded online. A community social media page appeared almost overnight. Posts asking questions. Speculation. Rumors spreading faster than facts. Someone says the land might not belong to the HOA. Is the entrance road private? Can they actually block us in? The HOA responded quickly with a public statement about ongoing administrative clarifications. They urged residents to remain calm, assured everyone that access to the community would remain uninterrupted. Remain uninterrupted. That phrase felt like a promise they had no right to make. Then the certified letter arrived. I knew what it was before I opened it. Inside was a formal request for a permanent access easement. Dozens of pages of legal language. Maps showing the road carved out as a shared entry point. Clauses about maintenance agreements, liability protections, and mutual benefit. It looked generous, cooperative, reasonable, but buried deep in the document was the truth. Once signed, I would never be able to close that road again. Not ever. I left the letter on the kitchen table and walked outside. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dirt road. Cars drove in and out like nothing had changed. Headlights flickered past the gate one after another. They were moving quickly now, faster than before, like they sensed time running out. My attorney called the next morning. "They're pushing because they're nervous," he said, "and they should be." He explained that without legal access, the HOA had a massive problem. Emergency services, deliveries, utilities. Every single home depended on that road. Without guaranteed access, property values could collapse. Insurance could become complicated. Future sales could stall. In short, the entire development rested on a strip of land they didn't control. Mine. And then he said the words that changed everything. "You're under no obligation to grant access." The silence after that felt heavy, because the power in the situation had shifted completely. For months, the HOA had acted like the situation was a minor error that would eventually smooth itself out. But now the stakes were visible to everyone. Survey flags, legal letters, online rumors, nervous homeowners watching every move. The pressure was building from every direction. And then the unannounced visit happened. 3 HOA representatives showed up at my door just before sunset. No appointment, no warning, just polite smiles stretched tight across anxious faces. They asked if we could talk neighbor to neighbor. We sat at the kitchen table. No lawyers, no conference rooms, just quiet tension and the hum of the refrigerator in the background. Their tone was different now, less confident, more urgent. They spoke about compromise, about responsibility, about the lives tied to that road. One of them leaned forward and said softly, "Closing the road would hurt a lot of innocent people." I didn't answer, because the truth was I already knew that. What they didn't realize was that the decision had stopped being theoretical the moment they sent that easement request, the moment they asked me to give up control permanently. As they left, the HOA president paused at the door. "If the road becomes inaccessible," she said carefully, "this situation will escalate very quickly." I watched their car disappear down the dirt road in the fading light. And for the first time, the silence that followed didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the calm right before a storm. The twist didn't come from the HOA. It came from my mailbox. 3 days after their unannounced visit, I found a thick envelope wedged between bills and flyers. No return address. Just my name typed neatly across the front. Inside was a stack of printed emails and scanned documents, clipped together with a single sticky note. You deserve to know the full story. At first, I thought it was junk, or maybe a neighbor trying to stir drama. But the moment I started reading, my pulse began to race. The emails weren't random. They were internal messages between the development company and the land acquisition firm, dated nearly a year before construction ever started. Subject lines jumped off the page. Urgent. Access issues still unresolved. Legal says proceed carefully. Road ownership unclear. I sat down at the kitchen table and read every page twice. Months before the first bulldozer arrived, someone inside the project had raised concerns about the road. Not quietly, not vaguely, clearly, repeatedly. One email stopped me cold. If the access road belongs to the adjacent parcel owner, we cannot guarantee permanent entry. Recommend securing easement before breaking ground. The reply came 2 hours later. Delaying will cost millions. We'll address access after phase 1. I stared at that sentence for a long time. They knew. Before the first foundation was poured. Before the first house was listed. Before families signed mortgages and moved their lives here. They knew the access road might not belong to them. And they built anyway. The room suddenly felt smaller. Heavier. Like the air itself had changed. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a gamble. A calculated risk taken by people who assumed the problem would be solved later. Quietly. Legally. Conveniently. Probably by convincing me to sign that easement. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of the spiral. It was my attorney. I told him about the documents. Sent photos. Waited while he read them in silence. We finally spoke. His voice sounded sharper than I'd ever heard it. This changes everything. Because the narrative the HOA had been presenting, the innocent title error, the unfortunate mix-up, wasn't entirely true. Internally, they had known access wasn't guaranteed. They had chosen to move forward anyway. That meant liability. Serious liability. It meant pressure. And pressure makes people act fast. That night, the neighborhood's social page exploded again, but this time, the tone was different. Angry posts, confused questions, screenshots of rumors spreading like wildfire. Someone had leaked the story. Homeowners were demanding answers, asking why they were never told about a potential access dispute, why their private community entrance might not actually be permanent. The HOA released another statement, this one longer and more defensive. Words like misinformation and ongoing legal review appeared. They promised transparency, promised stability, but the calm was gone. You could feel the tension in the air when I drove past the neighborhood the next day. Conversations stopped as my truck rolled by. People watched, whispered. Some looked worried. Others looked angry. One homeowner stepped into the road and flagged me down. "You're the landowner, right?" he asked, voice tight. I nodded slowly. He ran a hand through his hair and laughed, but there was no humor in it. We were told everything was secure. I didn't know what to say, because I could see the realization hitting him in real time. The road beneath his feet wasn't guaranteed. That evening, a new letter arrived from the HOA's legal team. Different tone, different urgency. They requested an emergency mediation meeting, said the situation had become time-sensitive, emphasized the importance of avoiding irreversible actions. Irreversible actions. They were afraid now, and fear makes people unpredictable. As the sun set, I walked out to the gate at the start of the road, the same gate that had stood open for months while construction trucks and moving vans passed freely through. I ran my hand across the cold metal. For the first time, the decision didn't feel like a distant possibility. It felt immediate. Behind me, my phone buzzed again with a new message from my attorney. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to access. Call me first thing in the morning. I looked down the road as headlights approached in the distance. One car after another returning home for the night. They had built an entire neighborhood on a gamble. And the gamble was running out of time. The morning of the mediation felt heavier than any day before it. Gray sky, still air, the kind of silence that makes everything feel like it's waiting. My attorney met me outside the office building. already holding a folder thick enough to bend in the middle. His expression told me everything before he even spoke. "They're scared," he said quietly. Inside, the room was bigger than the last meeting. More chairs, more people, 2 lawyers for the HOA, a representative from the development company, someone from their insurance provider. Even the land acquisition firm had sent a representative. The stakes had grown. No small talk this time. No coffee. No politis maíz. They started with numbers. Compensation for a permanent access easement. 6 figures. Then higher again. The figures climbed in calm, steady increments as if they were climbing stairs toward a door they assumed would eventually open. My attorney didn't even look at me before answering. No. The word landed like a dropped glass. The room shifted immediately. Tension sharpened. The polite tone cracked for the first time since this began. They explained the consequences. Lawsuits, delays, financial damage. They talked about the homeowners, the families, the lives tied to this development. They painted pictures of chaos if access disappeared. And they weren't wrong. But for the first time, I understood something clearly. This entire project had been built on the assumption that I would eventually give in. That pressure would win. That time would wear me down. My attorney slid a document across the table. A cease and desist order. Effective immediately, all unauthorized use of the road was to stop within 72 hours. Silence swallowed the room. The HOA president stared at the paper like it was written in another language. "You can't be serious." My attorney's voice stayed calm. "The road is private property. Continued use without permission is trespassing." The development manager leaned forward, panic breaking through his composure. "You would trap an entire neighborhood." I answered before my attorney could. "You built it without permission." The room erupted after that. Voices layered over each other. Legal terms flying like sparks. Deadlines. Emergency motions. Appeals. Consequences. But underneath the chaos was one undeniable truth. They had run out of leverage. 3 days later, the road closed. Not dramatically, not angrily, just quietly. A locked gate. A legal notice posted beside it. Orange barriers placed across the entrance. Simple. Final. The first morning was the hardest. Cars lined up along the dirt road, drivers stepping out with phones pressed to their ears. Confusion. Frustration. Fear. The reality of the situation had finally arrived. Emergency meetings were held that same afternoon. The HOA scrambled to arrange temporary access through a neighboring parcel. Expensive, complicated, rushed, but possible. Because when millions of dollars are at risk, solutions appear quickly. Within weeks, heavy equipment returned. Not to my land this time, but to the neighboring property. A new road began carving its way toward the highway. Longer, more expensive, a route they could have secured from the beginning. If they had waited, if they had listened, if they had asked. By the time the dust settled, the legal battles had shifted away from me. The development company turned on the acquisition firm. The acquisition firm blamed the surveyors. Insurance companies stepped in. Lawsuits unfolded far from my front gate. And slowly, life returned to quiet. The new access road opened months later. The neighborhood finally had an entrance that wasn't mine. The gate at my property stayed closed. For the first time in nearly a year, the land felt like it belonged to me again. I thought that was the end, until my attorney called one last time. "There's something you should know," he said. During the legal discovery process, more documents had surfaced. Old correspondence from years before the development ever began. Letters sent to my father. Offers to buy the land. Persistent. Increasing. Rejected every time. And then one final email from a developer executive, written long before construction ever started. "If we can't buy the road, we'll build around it and deal with the access later." I sat on the porch after that call, staring down the quiet stretch of dirt road my father had built with his own hands. He had known they would try someday. He just never knew how far they'd go. The months after the new access road opened felt strangely quiet. For the first time since this began, my mornings didn't start with emails from lawyers or calls from my attorney. No survey crews, no certified letters, no cars rolling down the dirt road at sunrise. Just wind moving through the grass and the distant hum of the highway far beyond my property line. Peace came back slowly. At first, I didn't trust it. I still found myself checking the gate every evening, half expecting another letter taped to the post or another unexpected visitor asking for just a quick conversation. But the visits never came. The HOA stopped contacting me. The legal fight had moved on without me, just like my attorney predicted. Their lawsuits turned inward, tangled between developers, acquisition firms, and insurance companies arguing over who had made the most expensive mistake. The family stayed. That part surprised me the most. I had quietly assumed many would leave after everything that happened. But they didn't. Life settled into the neighborhood. Kids rode bikes on their new road. Lawns grew thicker. Holiday decorations appeared on porches. The community kept moving forward, even if the story behind it wasn't what they expected when they bought their homes. One afternoon, nearly a year after the gate closed, I ran into the same man who had once asked about the survey flags in his yard. He was standing near the new road entrance, watching his daughter learn to ride a bike. He recognized my truck and walked over. For a moment, we just stood there in the sun, the past hanging quietly between us. "I was angry at you," he admitted. For a long time, I nodded. I figured. He watched his daughter wobble forward, then laughed when she nearly tipped over. "But after everything came out, we realized you weren't the problem." That sentence stayed with me long after I drove away, because that had been the hardest part of this entire fight, knowing the people most affected weren't the ones who caused it. Families had trusted the system, trusted paperwork, trusted promises made by people in offices and boardrooms. And when the truth surfaced, they had to rebuild their sense of security from scratch. Just like I had. The land feels different now. Not physically. The same fields, the same road, the same quiet evenings. But emotionally, it carries a new weight. A reminder of how fragile ownership can feel when paperwork, power, and pressure collide. My father used to say land was about control. I understand now that it's also about responsibility. Not just protecting it, but deciding how far you're willing to go when that protection affects others. Will I make the same decision again? Yes, but that doesn't mean it was easy. Sometimes I stand by the closed gate at sunset and watch the distant headlights on the new road. The neighborhood hums in the distance, separated by just enough space to feel like two different worlds that almost collided. And I think about how close everything came to ending differently. If I had signed the easement, if they had asked before building, if one decision had gone another way, this story could have had a very different ending. Instead, it became a reminder that standing your ground doesn't always feel victorious. Sometimes it feels quiet, bittersweet, necessary. The gate still stands where the dirt road begins. Simple metal, locked, unremarkable to anyone passing by. But to me, it represents something my father tried to teach my whole life. Ownership only means something if you're willing to defend it when it matters most. And if there's one lesson this entire experience left me with, it's this: never assume someone else will protect what's yours. If this story made you think, or if you've ever faced a situation where you had to stand your ground when it felt impossible, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else realize they're not alone.